The Justice Department released the 5 memos that James Comey had written in regard to the meetings he had with Donald Trump when he was the FBI director. Those memos were then given to Congress and then immediately leaked. So we now know what the memos said, and we have highlighted some of the more relevant or interesting parts of those memos for you. So here we go. Out of the 5 meetings between the two, Trump brought up Russian prostitutes on 3 occasions. So it's interesting that he kept bringing up the prostitutes, especially when you think of the Steele dossier and some of the more salacious components of that dossier and how he pushed back against that so aggressively. He seems pretty obsessed with the prostitutes issue. This is according to the memo. The president brought up the golden showers thing and said it really bothered him if his wife had any doubt about it. He then explained, as he did at our dinner, that he hadn't stayed overnight in Russia during the Miss Universe trip.
So can I jump in to break down a couple of things? So James Comey, when he was writing those memos, the quote that you just heard, he had not been fired yet. At that point, he doesn't necessarily have any beef with Donald Trump. And so what he did was he has meetings with Donald Trump, and right afterwards he writes down his notes of what happened. So he writes these things, and you could tell in the reading of the memos, kind of mystified, like he brought up the quote unquote golden showers thing. In another meeting, he's like, he brought up the prostitutes again, right? Telling me about how Vladimir Putin thinks there's beautiful Russian hookers. Trump is voluntarily constantly bringing this up to Comey, who is puzzled by it, but at that point, they don't have a beef. He hasn't been fired or anything like that. So that context is really important. And also, let's be fair to Donald Trump. The Steele dossier mentioned that he was with Russian prostitutes, and there was the peeing on the bed that the Obamas had stayed in. That is the allegations, and that the Russians had tape of it. So Trump is not bringing up Russian prostitutes out of thin air. It's not like, hey, how you doing? How was your tuna sandwich? Let me tell you about Russian prostitutes, okay? So there is that context. On the other hand, if someone had accused me of that and it was preposterous, I don't know that I would bring it up meeting after meeting. Like, now let me tell you something about how I was not with Russian hookers. So that's important context.
Right, and it also, you have to take into account the context in which these conversations are taking place, because again, it's in the context of possible Russian interference into our elections, right? Interfering in our elections. And so it's weird that something as serious as that, or potentially serious as that, is not what's concerning Trump. It's more the salacious prostitute thing.
But I think that's where he's just the most comfortable. I mean, I think his whole MO is to really divert anyone from anything of any importance, or not that Russian prostitutes might not have importance, because they clearly do to him. But to kind of divert attention and sort of, I think, calculating, even though nothing was going on in his mind yet, perhaps regarding what Comey would do later, kind of still trying to steer the conversation in a way that maybe kept him off guard of things that are more important, possibly, than Russian prostitutes.
But let's also keep it real, right? The only thing Donald Trump cares about is Donald Trump. So one, he's looking to protect himself, of course, right? But number two, even if he hadn't done anything with the Russians and there was no collusion at all and there was no tape and there was no anything, he still wouldn't have cared about Russian interference in the election. Unless it went against him, and then he would have cared a lot, right? But it wound up helping him. So he's like, I don't think it even crossed his mind that he was supposed to tell the FBI director, hey, let's make sure they don't interfere in our democracy again.
Right.
I don't think it even occurred to him. No. But he brought that up apparently 0 times. He brought up Russian hookers 3 times.
You go with what you know, or not. I don't know.
And just one more quick part of the memo in regard to his obsession with the hookers. The president, according to the memo, said the hookers thing is nonsense, but that Putin had told him, quote, "We have some of the most beautiful hookers in the world." So I don't know why the conversation kept going to the hookers, but it did. And so Comey outlined it in all of these different memos, and now we know exactly what he wrote in those memos.
So that's relevant actually for another reason, because Trump claims that he never talked to Putin until he became president.
Exactly.
Now, in an official meeting with him as president of the United States, did Vlad out of nowhere and be like, I gotta tell you something, Donald, congratulations on being elected. Plus, we've got amazing hookers in Russia. So it seems to indicate that Trump and Putin had an earlier conversation that Trump has covered up. Yet another lie. By the way, the first memo had another Trump lie where he said that he left that night even before staying. So meaning like I wasn't even in that hotel because I'd already left. There are other people who were on that trip saying, no, he did not leave. He stayed in Russia.
So now let's get to what Trump had told Comey in regard to reporters who he was getting frustrated with. Now, as we know, during the Trump administration, there have been a number of leaks. It's like every week we get another huge leak from people who are very close to the president. And he wants to know who those sources are, who is talking to the press. And here's what he allegedly told Comey. Trump replied that we need to go after the reporters and referred to the fact that 10 or 15 years ago, we put them in jail to find out what they know, and it worked. He mentioned Judy Miller by name. He replied by saying it may involve putting reporters in jail. They spend a couple days in jail, make a new friend, and they are ready to talk.
So another point in the authenticity of these memos, but also to the ambivalence that a lot of people feel about James Comey, he said he laughed at those comments, like he seems to not be bothered by them. So remember, James Comey was a Republican. He was the #2 under John Ashcroft. He's writing these memos at the time. So again, he has no fight with Donald Trump. Donald Trump says, let's put some reporters in jail. And Comey's like, oh, no, that's an interesting idea. All right. So
realizing it was a ridiculous statement, and it goes back to this idea that Trump just likes to say things to divert attention from anything else, and especially anything he might be worried. And he clearly does not like reporters. He especially does not like reporters who say anything bad about him, which tends to be most reporters. So our jails would be like sort of
full,
busting at the seams with So.
And it's not even just saying bad things about him, just reporting the facts, which is the opposite of his lies. So that's what but that's not why you send reporters to jail. I mean, if there was any issue at all, it would be having to do with leaks and of classified intelligence. But that's, again, Trump doesn't understand any of that. He's just like, I don't like them. They keep telling things that are true that just opposite of what I say. Can we put them in prison? He's asking the FBI director whether he could put journalists in jail.
So this part of the memo isn't really getting as much attention as I feel like it should. There's a lot more, attention paid to the hookers, and I understand why. But this is the part that actually worries me the most, because Trump has pretty successfully done damage to credible news organizations, even if we don't like those news organizations, even if we don't think they do a great job in uncovering real news stories that we think are important. CNN is not fake news, right? CNN could do a better job on some stories, but it doesn't spread lies or fabricate stories. And Trump has successfully convinced his base that they're the bad guys, they are to be attacked, they're not to be trusted. And then, behind the scenes, he's talking about imprisoning journalists that don't give up the sources, which, by the way, legally can happen. That did happen to Judy Miller when she was working for the New York Times. But that sets a really scary environment for people who want to be whistleblowers. I mean, we already lived in a scary environment for whistleblowers, but anyone who wants to do real journalism. So there needs to be something done to ensure our protection, because I think people are way too quick to forget about the First Amendment, the protections that journalists have.
Right, we have a freedom of the press, we have a freedom of expression, and he does not like that. And so his idea is to sort of move that out of sort of a democratic situation into how he sees how things should be. And that is a concern. It's a concern to all journalists. And that was around the time where he was lambasting CNN on a regular basis.
Right.
And then having these side conversations with Comey and bringing up all the stuff that he was concerned about. And journalists were a part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then finally, guys, if we normalize this and we let him stay around for 8 years, those instincts are real. Those are documented in private meetings with the FBI director. It's not for his base. It's not part of his strategy. It's not at a pep rally. It's privately talking to the FBI director. Hey, can we put journalists I don't like in jail? You let that guy stay around long enough. You know what he's going to do? Put journalists in jail. That's what he's going to do.
You just watched a video by the Young Turks, home of the revolution. If you'd like to get a lot more than that, get the full show by becoming a member. tytnetwork.com/join.